Are you ready to go live? You're live, and I'm smiling, and I'm looking in the camera. Hey, everybody, how you doing? It's Peter and Tracy. Hi, Tracy. How you doing today?
I'm great, Peter. How are you?
I'm very good. I just got back from Malibu. I went up there. There's a kind of a, I think it's a breaking the law kind of anti-lockdown thing where there's this informal car show that happens at Cross Creek Shopping Center in Malibu every Sunday morning. It's like everybody who owns a car that costs over $100,000 in Malibu drives to the shopping center, and they all park their cars next to each other, and they have an informal car show. And so my friends have been going there every weekend, and so I went up to meet them for breakfast, although I got there a little bit late, so I just had coffee. But what are you doing?
I just finished my long walk where I listened to the entirety of Sir Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. And that's
Was that on script?
Yes, it was on script.
I think that's how I did it also. Yeah, it's not very long, right? It's like an hour and 40 minutes or something. Yeah, I was reading about that. Apparently, like, it was supposed to be an 8-chapter book or something like that, and he only got 6 chapters done before he dropped dead. Something like that.
Well, I'm not upset that I didn't get to read 2 more chapters of it.
The last chapter was just like a list of stuff, right?
Right. The whole thing was kind of bizarre, and a list of things that they could do on this magical island.
Right. That some say is North America, right? Because he was supposedly in Peru or someplace like that, and they were talking about Atlantis, and Atlantis was supposed to be, if you did the calculations, it would have been North America. It would have been the North American continent. So Francis Bacon thought North America was Atlantis.
There you go. You've read the book.
Yeah, which would explain the Atlantic Council and NATO and all of the other intrigues with the Illuminati and their fascination with North America, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so you and I were talking this morning. Actually, I think you tweeted something out about red versus blue or a civil war or something, and I had a disagreement with it. What was it that you said?
I'm looking for it right now. It was a tweet response to Kurt Schlichter had put out a poll. What's your reaction to the Democrats' threats to start yet another civil war if Trump and the GOP do what they were elected to do and confirm a new justice? And my response was, it's time for red and blue to peacefully separate who's the best divorce lawyer in America.
Yeah, and my pushback was something about.
You said, I disagree. There has to be a method to mass unhypnotize a population.
That's right. And to that end, I got about an hour and a half into Transformation of America by Mark Phillips and Kathy O'Brien, which is about deprogramming people who have been turned into MK Ultra sex slaves, which is, it's very interesting. It's an interesting book. If you like many things that seem to be credible, if you go and you look them up on Wikipedia says it's a conspiracy theory. But if you assume that Wikipedia is controlled, I was looking at the source code of Wikipedia. Wikipedia has always been a government program. Like, when you look at the way that, I used to be a computer science major on the ARPANET in 1974 at UC Santa Barbara, and I look at the code for Wikimedia, the open source code, and it's like, God, it's right out of the 1980s. There's nothing very clever about it at all. It's completely arcane. It's got this government mindset about the way that it's constructed. There was no user understanding or methodology. It's what Alan Cooper would refer to as a implementation model. That is, the software reflects the way that the people who wrote it look. So I've gone off on a complete birdwalk about Wikipedia. But,
no, but that's interesting. But if anybody that doesn't understand code, how would they pick up on that? Like, could you explain it in a way that somebody that doesn't know what you're talking about would get it?
I don't think
simple, or is it?
Well, I think it's just kind of a mindset. And Alan Cooper does talk about it in his book. He wrote 2 books. One is About Face, and the second one is The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. And I think it's in About Face that he talks about this thing that he calls the implementation model, which is that, software developers will be in a room, they'll write stuff up on a whiteboard, and they'll decide how they want the software to work, and then they go code it the way that the software, that they decide that they want the software to work. They usually don't have conversations, or back in the day, they didn't have conversations about what the user experience was going to be, because you had a lot of people who were like typing things on CRT screens for the first time. When I first started in computer science, you did things on cards, and then the big breakthrough was, oh, look, you've got a keyboard and you could just type into this screen and then it'll work. This is before graphic user interfaces or mice or any of that other thing. And
they were punch cards, right? That you would code onto the punch card.
IBM punch cards. Yeah, I always thought that if you could find one of those punch card machines, you could build a bar. Like I envisioned a bar, and the bar was made out of those punch card machines, because they're about bar height, and
okay.
If you put an acrylic tabletop on something, and you could just run them, and you could have the cards dropping down and sorting and doing all of their other kind of.
Yeah, see, I have a hard time visualizing it. So how big were the cards?
The cards are about, I would say that they're about 3.5 inches high and about, 7.5, 8 inches wide. Okay. They were called IBM punch cards. So if you Google that, you can probably find IBM punch card. And
then to run a program, you have to feed in one card after another?
Yeah, what you would do is you would write out your program. A lot of times you just write it out with a pen or a pencil, like 1 line, 2 line, 3 line, 4 line. And then you would hand it to somebody who worked in the computer center, and they would actually punch those cards out. Sometimes grad students, a lot of times you could make money being the person who sits and punches, with the card puncher, because there was a machine, you put the card in it and you hit. Yeah, but if you make any mistakes, you got to throw the card away and you have to start all over again. There's no erase, right? So, you'd write your program out on paper, and then you'd give it to somebody, and they would punch the cards in, and then they would give you back a stack of cards, and then you would take the card stack to somebody else, and they would put the card stack into the machine, and they would just run it, and then the output of your program would be paper. It would come out of this paper machine, and then you would go look at it, and you would be able to key punch. Yeah, Ron's got it. Key punch operators. And then it would run or it wouldn't run, and it would have the result that you wanted or it wouldn't, and then you would fix whatever problems that you had with the program by going in and writing a new line of code and getting a new card punched out, which you put into the deck, and then you handed it to somebody and you ran it over again. So, people were a lot more careful when they were writing programs because the process was really slow. It's kind of like film cameras. You had to go have your film developed. So you were kind of taking, you were spending a lot of effort at making sure that you got it right the first time so that you didn't have to repeat everything. But we've gone off on this total birdwalk because we're talking about transformation of America and how I went and I checked it out on Wikipedia. And when I checked it on Wikipedia said that it was a conspiracy theory. The same way that Wikipedia says that neurolinguistic programming is pseudoscience. It seems like any program that the Central Intelligence Agency doesn't want anybody to know about, they use Wikipedia in order to create a cover story for it. So
And
transformation.
you look at the source code, and it seems to you that Wikipedia from the outset has been some sort of a government operation.
Yeah, I think that the whole idea that that there's this free database and that all of these college students just jumped in and gave 1 million hours worth of expertise for free is nonsense. I don't think that's true. I mean, have you ever tried to start something on the internet and just had people organically jump in? There's all these origin myths for all of these things. IMDb is probably the same way. Although IMDb, I can see the passion of people who love movies putting that stuff in. And I understand fandoms and the whole kind of like Reddit autist. But, that autist myth is out there too, that 4chan. One of the things lately, there was something that somebody said 4chan solved. What's Ron saying? The key punch was the computer that made World War II run on time. Yes, it was also used by the Nazis, I think, in order to manage all of the populations that they were moving around and changing in Europe. They got money to do that from IBM. So where were we?
We were talking about the myth of the autists and how 4chan just recently got credit for.
Yeah, 4chan just and then I started thinking about the whole Shia LaBeouf thing. Shia LaBeouf putting up his flag and then having everybody find it on the internet. And it made me think of this video that I saw about Operation Gladio, where there was this Italian intelligence guy that was being interviewed. And he said that they had, through their intelligence network, that they knew where Aldo Moro was being held. And so when the reporters asked them how they knew where Aldo Moro was being held, he told the media that they had hired a psychic and that they were using a Ouija board in order to discover the location of Aldo Moro. And the media just sucked that up and reported it out. And then everybody was going to their psychics and they were all trying to figure that out. And the reality is that the CIA already knew where Aldo Moro was, because they probably are the ones that kidnapped him in the first place. So
you got to backfill the story. And just Aldo Moro was the prime minister of Italy?
He was yes. And he looked like he was going to form a coalition government with the communists, and they couldn't have that happen. So they made him disappear.
The Gladio army, which was the leave behind armies that we talked about in 2 episodes ago. So if you want to get more on that, you can go back and check that one out. But
yeah, or you can read the book Operation Gladio, which is a good source for that. Yeah, so whenever I see these, I've been thinking the last couple of days, was that whole Shia LaBeouf thing a psyop? Like, we're going to hire you as an actor, Shia. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this flag up. And then what we want you to do is we want you to go online as an actor and portray this character that's losing his shit. Okay. And then that will make all of these autists on 4chan giggle and cackle. And then what we'll do is we will leak information based on information that we already have. We'll create a parallel construction. We'll live out the parallel construction on 4chan, and then you will continually be owned by the autists, who are actually just the intelligence operators. And the whole thing is a psyop, because there isn't really any technology that's being used. If you know where the location already is, you can reverse engineer out a parallel construction, and then you can put this out onto 4chan, and then you can leak stories to various authors out there in the world who covered the gamer autist beat, and then they report it as if it's fact and as if this is what actually happened, when in reality the whole thing was just a psychological operation in the first place. So that's kind of where my brain has been going lately. And the reason that I'm bringing it up is because when we were talking, when you had mentioned the whole Civil War, you were talking about, I guess you were talking about, how do you have a civil war, right? Is that?
Well, no, I just want to avoid civil war. I'm saying, can we just say we'd rather not go there? So what's the way to not end up in a hot civil war? And that's just to say, okay, we don't want to live with each other anymore. We don't want to live under the same set federal government as the left.
Right. And then you asked me, I think, whether or not I thought that people could become unhypnotized. And my response back to you was that most of the people that I've been talking to lately who are unhypnotized are coming from the left. And I think that it's things like, and specifically the COVID thing switching over to another agenda in lockstep, which, by the way, is the name of the Rockefeller Foundation program that describes all of this stuff, is that, the quick cutover from, oh, this is a health court crisis, to, oh, this is racism, to, oh, this is about the Supreme Court, oh, this is about that. The walloping window blind of attention is snapping a lot of people out of their hypnosis, and they're starting to wake up and say, what the hell is going on here? Who do I believe? What channel do I turn on to find out what's actually happening? And the answer is probably this one, but we don't make enough podcasts. So you should probably take a look at some of the stuff that we've been reading.
Yeah, I'll put up a reading list in the description on YouTube.
What are you reading this week, Tracy?
This week, let me see what I've got open right now. I'm still working my way through. Oh, it's not in here. My Big Toe, which is Tom Campbell's his theory of everything about the nature of the universe. So that's not really all that political.
Right.
Let me see what else. I gotta open up my script here for a second. I'm listening to a book called Overthrow, which is about all of the wonderful countries and places around the world that the American government has overthrown.
So the color revolutions, kind of the history.
No, this is way before the color revolutions.
Okay.
This starts 1893 when we basically deposed the Queen of Hawaii.
So does it go back to France, where we deposed the King of France? Oh, that was the Rothschilds. That was the European office.
Right. No, it starts kind of like this is when, and I think it's a really interesting way to set up why it starts happening at that point in time. They're saying that the 1890 census kind of showed everybody that we had gone as far west as we could on the continent. Like that was the end of the line for expansion. Right. So the question then becomes, we were already producing enough goods and services at that time to satisfy the entire American market. So who are you going to sell all this excess stuff to? And so the powers that be started thinking, well, it's easier to just take over other countries and make them our shoppers than it is to try to, because Europe had tariffs and all this kind of stuff. So they look at Hawaii. There was already a lot of Americans there doing business, and they had a really good sugar crop. So why not just take it over? And then comes Cuba right behind that, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines.
Does it go into Cecil Rhodes and the Round Table? Are they involved in it?
Brought in yet, and I can't, it's kind of structured strangely where it jumps around. At first it was going chronologically, and then after, it's still in the 1890s, so that would be about the time the Round Table comes into being.
I think 1895 I think is the Round Table. It's Rhodes and Milner decide that they rebrand the empire the Commonwealth, I think. I was reading something the other day that John Dee was the one who coined the empire, the British Empire. So
and who is John Dee, for those who haven't ever heard that name before?
John Dee was the astrologer, head of intelligence for Queen Elizabeth I. And his code name when he was on the continent was 007. So he's the original 007. And I met a woman at the Malibu car show, and she has a big 7 on the side of her car. And I told her that it reminded me of John Dee. Okay, Magic to Matisse says, "What's up, guys?" And I'm saying hi to Ali. Okay,
hi,
so
Ali.
Yeah. So anyway, where was I? We were talking about.
I'm reading this book. It's called Overthrow. If anybody's interested, it was written by Stephen Kinzer, and that's available on I guess it's my favorite reading app, Script. I think you're there with me too. Huh?
Yeah. Yep. And I'm reading Transformation of America by Mark Phillips and Kathy O'Neill. And then I just finished Clock Shavings by Tracy Twyman. And before that, Baphomet. And before that, Money Grows on the Tree of Life. I had a kind of a Tracy Twyman buffet there. And yeah. And that stuff is all super interesting. One of the things that I think is particularly interesting about the Kathy O'Brien worldview is that she looks at all of the stuff that's satanic and occult as mind control. She thinks that there's a certain terror element to all of it that traumatizes a lot of the people who are dealing with it. And regardless of whether or not it's got some kind of spiritual construct or not, that the psychological damage that it does to people is effective, and that the main reason that it's used by a lot of these organizations is purely for the mind control aspect of it, regardless of whether or not people are really getting in contact with demons or deities or not. She said it's unimportant because the trauma that it causes winds up giving the controllers, a lever in order to manage their slaves, their mind slaves. So I found that pretty interesting. It was a good contrast to go from Tracy Twyman to go to Kathy O'Brien. And Ali says, yes, unimportant, it's the same. Right, exactly. So Kathy O'Brien, the book is interesting. And the first part of the book, I think, is written by her husband, who's the guy who was deprogramming her. And he's
and if people don't know who she is, Peter, do you want to throw a little bit of her backstory in there?
Sure. So the story is that she was a mind-controlled sex slave that was being used by intelligence to compromise and control politicians and other people. And that she was being operated out of the George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan White Houses. And that,
if I remember correctly, her parents kind of gave her over to the CIA, right?
That's right. That's right. Her father was compromised. He was a pedophile. What do you call it when you have sex with your own family?
Incestual pedophile.
Yeah, he was an incestual pedophile, and somehow he got compromised, and they let him off if he would give them his daughter. And so she was raised into this program from the time she was a tiny kid, and then she got pregnant and had a kid, and then they were using her kid also, and that she ran by random circumstance. She ran into this guy, Mark Phillips, who was an ex-CIA mind control operator who, for whatever reason, took pity on her and realized that she'd been used in this terrible way, and he orchestrated this way to basically break her out of this program. And I'm at the point that I'm at in the book right now, they're hiding in Alaska on welfare because part of her deprogramming is to take all media away from her, including television, radio, and books, and put her through this kind of structured system where she's writing down all of her memories, and they are discussing all of her memories in a historical construct without asking the question, how did that make you feel? Because attaching that stuff to feelings is how the mind control works. So you need to be able to talk about it objectively. And he's got this entire kind of structured system that he took her through in order to kind of deprogram her and get her to a point where she is lucid and discussing this stuff in a very kind of matter-of-fact and unemotional way. And if you watch her videos, that's kind of how she presents herself too. She's very academic. It's not any of this kind of histrionic, oh, woe is me nonsense that you see from a lot of, Jerry Springer type presentations of people who, are looking for attention. She doesn't seem to be looking for attention. She seems to be trying to figure out a way to fix the world, which brings me back to the reason that you and I are talking today, which is, are we going to have a war, or are we going to figure out a way to work this out?
Well, or the third option where we just break up. Because I feel like we're in an abusive relationship with the left. Right. I don't think they're ever going to stop. They're not going to come to a point where they say this is good enough. Not only do they want you to abide by their bullshit, but they want you to submit to it and accept it. This is, it's beyond tolerance at this point. That's not good enough.
Right. Well,
and I don't think that they can turn around from that. Do you? Do you think they can moderate themselves?
Well, it's interesting because I think it depends on whether or not it goes back to the walloping window blind. There are people who are being so spun around by the changes of the weather vane, going from COVID to BLM to the Supreme Court. And it's like a lot of people are starting to feel like they're being manipulated. And if they're feeling like they're being manipulated, maybe they will look for answers. And if they're looking for answers, maybe they'll find some truth. And I think that a lot of that just has to do with picking one thing that you used to believe and taking a look at it and figuring out whether or not it's true. And once you can figure out what that one thing is, then you can move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. But that's kind of where I've been trying to steer it. I was having an argument with somebody yesterday who was mad at me for not wearing a mask. And I said, why are you mad? And they said, well, because you're ignoring, everybody's health. And I said, I'm just looking at the math. So I did the numbers. In California, there's 15,000 people who've died of COVID related diseases, but the CDC says 96% of those people have comorbidities. But still, 15,000 out of 40 million is 0.0375%. I think that was the number that I got. So, way, way lower than, a hundredth of 1%. And if you take the comorbidities out of it, it's like 0.0015%. So now we're in thousandths of a percent or 10,000ths of a percent. And so I'm just looking at the numbers, and I came back to this person and I said, look, here are the numbers. Okay, this is math. I'm not telling you what my opinion is. I'm not telling you what anybody else's opinion is. But if you look at this number of 600 people who died of COVID without a comorbidity in California, you have to benchmark that against the number of people who drowned in California last year, which is 400. So you got 600 people that died of COVID. You got 400 people that drowned. I didn't find the number of people that were hit by cars in crosswalks, but my guess is it's probably around 600, something like that. It's just one of those things. People are in denial of the fact that people died. Okay, COPD. What's Ron saying?
So he's saying he claims that he has COPD, and that's why he can't wear a mask. But see, by their logic, going by your numbers, you say 400 people drowned in California last year. If we want to protect everybody from that, then we should all be walking around with scuba tanks.
Or we should fill all the pools in with concrete.
Right. Yeah. Well, how are you going to shut off the ocean, though?
Yeah, no one's allowed.
People That's true.
Right. Nobody should be allowed to go swimming anymore.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
So anyway, but you asked the question, like, how do we stop this? And, it's like trying to figure out what the one thing is that will wake people up. I mean, that's why I was talking about, Dan Rather and Lee Harvey Oswald the last time that we talked or 2 times ago, was because, if you watch the video and you see Dan Rather say that his head moved violently forward, and then you watch the video and his head is moving violently backward, then people who are my age look at that and go, wow, that's really weird. And then the next question is, how come nobody ever said anything about that? Like when that video came out in when the Zapruder film came out in 1970, nobody called Dan Rather out on that. You know, nobody said anything. So, you know, my strategy at this point, you know, and I said to the person I was having the argument with, because they told me that they thought I was crazy, I said, just pick one thing. Just tell me one thing. And they said it's everything. And that's the best tell for cognitive dissonance. When somebody can't name something, they go to a feeling, and the feeling is usually some kind of a universal thought. Like it's everything you do, Dad. Oh, oops, I outed my daughter. And then you know, you force them into the situation where they have to name one thing. And so the one thing that she picked was the masks. And then I just went to math. I didn't go to feelings. And I've left it there. You know, the last comment from her to me was okay. And was that like, okay, you understand what I'm saying, or okay, you don't want to talk about this anymore? But in any case, I read the okay as cognitive dissonance. Like her worldview was A. I presented data that showed B, which I assume is going to go into a cognitive dissonant state. And the reality is that they'll either do something with it or they won't do something with it. But I guess at the end of the day, that's all you can do, because you can't force them into having the recognition unless you want to put them into a camp, right?
Right.
Which is what they want to do to us.
Exactly.
Right.
But see, that's why I keep saying we need to break up with these people. They want to put us into camps, and you're thinking that we can evangelize one person at a time. That's why I said, how is this scalable? Because it doesn't seem to me that you can do mass wake up. I get it that a lot of people are being woke now. And in my world, it's people getting awakened by the ever-changing rules and the illogic of the rules around the lockdowns, at least in Pennsylvania, because they don't make any sense whatsoever. And that starts confounding people that actually like to think logically.
Right. So are they solving the problem for us by overstaying their welcome?
They could be, but the problem is they still have a lot of power, and they still have the media. Because I was thinking, if we just split up, right, we would have our own media in red country, whatever you want to call it, whatever it ends up being. We wouldn't have to deal with CNN lying. Like, can you imagine if you had a national media that just told you what the hell was happening and didn't color it with opinion or try to spin stuff? And how much different would that be? And they could, and I was thinking their entire media would be talking about this other country that used to be part of them and how insane they are over there.
Yeah, and you might also have an economy that would thrive. However, you know, economies are dependent upon bank and monetary policy. I watched a movie. Actually, Ali turned me onto this guy. Darn it, what's his name? The movie is called The Forecaster.
Okay.
And the guy's name is what's it called? Anyway, this guy is he's the guy who Marty Armstrong. And Marty Armstrong is a guy who in the 80s started noticing sacred geometry-like patterns based on pi that were taking place in markets, and started doing market predictions based on pi. And then when people in the intelligence community found out, the banking and intelligence community, which is probably just the same community, figured out what he was doing, they started standing on his neck legally in order to, he was also tied to Jafra and the BCCI, not BCCI, what was the other bank? The Epstein, what am I looking at? Pat. I'm confusing things. Okay, so
yeah. Are you talking about
so
Deutsche Bank?
He was involved with a bank, and the bank was involved with this guy Jafra, and it had to do with flipping the Soviet Union over to the Russian Republic and replacing Boris Yeltsin and something like $100 billion money laundering scheme. And he got caught up in this as the likely patsy because he was practicing all of this finance theory that was based on his mathematical models that were beating the market. And they were beating the market because he understood what their timing mechanisms were. And he didn't understand why they were timing things the way that they did. I mean, my assumption is that it probably has something to do with astrology or, planetary alignment or things like that that are also part of this kind of galactic clock mechanism that we're a part of. But he spent 7 years in prison for contempt without a charge. This happens in the United States of America. That's why I tweeted out yesterday. If you want proof that we live in a fascist country, watch the Forecaster with Martin Armstrong. Guy spent 7 years in New York in the MMC where Epstein was killed. Spent 7 years in there, and then when he finally pled guilty to a lesser charge, they didn't use any of his contempt time as time served, and he spent another 5 years in prison. So he spent 12 years in prison, for doing nothing, except having a computer algorithm that predicted all of the major changes in the stock market in our lifetime. So I don't know why I'm talking about Martin Armstrong now.
I don't remember. We were talking about having our own separate countries, and then you were saying a lot of that relies on having a strong relies on the banking system and the market and all that.
Right, and
the U.S. owns the New York Stock Exchange. It's just in New York. It's not a function of the government. We're not that fascist yet, Peter.
Yeah, but we're not in a cash-free society. We're in a society that's in that where the lights that are on and the camera that I'm talking to you through and the networks are all being controlled with the same monetary system, and the people that are controlling that monetary system control the world. So to the extent
from that, I mean, I'm talking about a new country that we would start ground up, because we don't want to take this hideous government behemoth with us, do we? Let the left have it. They've infected it.
Right. Well, where do we go, Tracy? Pennsylvania?
We don't have to go anywhere. No, I don't know that we have to go anywhere. That's the thing. That's the thing to work out, is how to live side by side while abiding by a different set of laws.
So that's Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash world, where we live in an anarcho-capitalist world, where the world is separated into files and burbclaves. Each one have their own autonomous legal system, and the only thing that connects all of them together is the common economic protocol, which is probably something that looks like Bitcoin with a Bill of Rights attached to it. If I had more faith in Bitcoin, it would sound like a great idea. It's just that Bitcoin runs on top of this network that's controlled by the monetary system. So,
right.
The oil dollar will be changed to the hemp dollar. Here's the thing about all these dollars, these bases, they're all determined by the bank, right? The gold standard was determined by the bank, and the fiat standard is determined by the bank. And
it depends on what you're talking about. You mean they chose that to be what it was tied to, the banks? Because I'm thinking about like the price setting.
Yeah.
Where gold traded against, that was set, well, at least in the States in the during the Depression, Roosevelt himself was like by decree just setting the price of gold every day based on absolutely nothing.
It was $35 an ounce.
Yeah, but they kept changing it
for decades. It was, it was mandated, and Max Kaiser. When I met Max Kaiser in 1996, he was big on maybe 95. He was big on what?
Who is Max Kaiser?
Max Kaiser is a economic terrorist. He's a ex Wall Street trader who wrote the patent for the virtual trader mechanism that the Hollywood Stock Exchange uses in order to create, and the Hollywood Stock Exchange, which he and I worked on together, created essentially the first cryptocurrency, which was the Hollywood dollar, because people would bet on, they would invest in movies and movie stars as stocks and bonds in a virtual market that was being driven by the box office performance of those motion pictures. So, Hollywood Stock Exchange was bought by Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald was the top 2 floors of the Twin Towers. So on 9/11, that disappeared. And even though the Hollywood Stock Exchange is still around, I don't think that Max ever got a payday from that. And then he became a broadcaster, and I think he's had the top rated show on RT for 10 years now or something. And he broadcasts out of his house in North Carolina now. But why was I talking about Max Kaiser?
We were talking about gold, but I do want to agree with
Max Kaiser said in '97 that gold was going to go to $2,000 an ounce, and it did. Actually, it was at 500, and it did go to $2,000, but it took 15 or 20 years to get there. That wake-up call to me was, well, it's not really, the demand cycle here is being controlled by people. Like there are specialists that are watching this stuff, and that they are making sure that it stays within a certain tolerance. And I don't know what that is, but it certainly makes it difficult to invest in things like that, especially if you're trying to go for a hedge. I mean, for all I know, that the next standard will be, somebody said hemp, it'll be uranium, or it will be, I don't know, space rocks that are being harvested by Elon Musk or something else. It's whatever the banks decide they want it to be. That's the problem.
Yeah, but it also, I mean, I like to think that the public has some sort of say in all of that, and I do think that people feel safest with gold. So it could go back to that on a gold standard, but figuring out what that would be. I don't know if you've ever seen any of George Gammon. Are you familiar with him?
I'm not.
He has a great YouTube channel where he explains investing and all sorts of stuff, but he does it in regular people speak. So you don't get overwhelmed by hearing all these words, and you have to sit there with an investment dictionary to understand what the hell he's talking about. So he does a really good job of making it accessible. And he did a video a while ago talking about the 2 schools of thought, at least from kind of the Austrian side of the ledger, and where gold will go. And there's one school that says it'll go to 50,000 an ounce, and one that says it'll go to 100,000 plus an ounce. And the way that they arrive at that is by looking at the total number of dollars that exist in the world, which Gammon says could be in excess of 13 trillion. And then saying this is how much gold exists, so therefore this is the exchange. And so it's either 50 or 100, depending on how much money you can actually find that exists. It's pretty wild.
So this 13 trillion, that sounds low to me.
Well, that's what they could figure out, just kind of looking and seeing, okay, what seems to exist? Because this is just US dollars. This is not the total of the world economy.
I see.
It was an interesting thing. I'll link to it in the video on YouTube, because he went through and talked about how the British went off the gold standard during World War I because they wanted to inflate. And when they went back to the gold standard, so say that the exchange rate prior to going off of it had been 20 pounds was an ounce of gold, and then they doubled the money supply. And when they went to go back onto the gold standard, it was just decreed, it's going to be right where it was before. It's still going to be 20 to 1. And John Maynard Keynes, of all people, raised his hand and was like, no, you can't do that. It's got to be 40 to 1 now, because you've doubled the money supply. And they didn't listen to him. So that's how you end up.
Right. Because economists are psyops. They are shiny objects that are dangled in front of intellectuals in order to make them believe that they actually know what's going on when they don't. I mean, that's what's interesting about the forecaster guy, Marty Armstrong, is that it seems like, he's figured out that there's a calendar that they're sticking to, and that the calendar rules all of decision making, and that all of this other kind of intellectualizing about why and how are nonsense, because that's not actually what's really going on. So anyway, she says they can grow diamonds in labs, gemstones, metals as well. Haven't been around the industry for a while. Yeah, that's right. It's like, again, it's like, is gold really a limited thing? It seems like you can dig more holes in the ground and pull more out. So,
Yeah, but then you just adjust accordingly.
I guess.
That's why it has to be a fluid exchange, a fluid rate.
Right.
And who knows what we're going to find mining asteroids. But the idea is it's backed by something solid.
Yeah. So anyway, so you want to start. So we want Neal Stephenson. So you're opting for the Neal Stephenson universe, where we live in burgclaves and files. We have a common economic protocol, and then if you want, I think that the first neighborhood that the Deliberator went into at the beginning of Snow Crash, when he was driving through the backyards trying to get away from the police, I think he was trying to get away from someone, was something white pearly gates. It was the white supremacist neighborhood, and he was half black, half Asian. So he was concerned that driving through the white supremacist neighborhood was going to be a problem for him. That was the way that Stevenson kind of let us know that this world wasn't the same world that we were used to. But nothing happened to him. Well, he drove into a pool, and then Uncle Enzo showed up, right, in his helicopter, and then had to apologize to the person who ordered the pizza for not getting their pizza in 20 minutes. And that's something that you never do, is make Uncle Enzo apologize. And that set the story off in the direction. But yeah, common economic protocol. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to get there. I just don't see it happening, and I'd probably have to move, because I'd be in Rob Reiner's file, because he's my neighbor.
And that's no good. No, I don't see this peaceably settling down anytime soon.
Not until at least I think February. I think maybe in February it'll settle down, because people will get exhausted.
You think?
I think that being angry all the time is tiring. I think it's demoralizing. I think that, you get a bunch of people who get depressed and they kill themselves, or they decide that the world isn't the way that they wanted it to be, and they're just going to make do. And I don't know. I just I see a lot of people knuckling under and giving in, and then I see a lot of people who are just saying, I'm not going to take it anymore. So what do they say about the American Revolution? Only a third of the people were engaged, and only 5% or
3%. That's why.
The
3%. About the 3%ers.
Yeah, only 3% of the people actually were engaged in some kind of, and that's because people are sheep. A lot of people are sheep, so they just want to get along. It's totally a normal thing, but at a certain point, you got to stand up, or someone's going to step on your neck. So that's where we're at. But I've just been working on the dehypnotizing people part. I'm trying to figure it out. Again, this book, Transformation of America, he's talking about all the Milton Erickson books that he's reading at the beginning of the book. And I'm thinking, oh, great, here's 5 more Milton Erickson books I've got to go read. And
Milton Erickson being one of the greatest hypnotherapists of all time.
Yeah. And and he's kind of his specialty is covert hypnosis. That is, he hypnotizes people without directly inducing people into, an alpha state. He looks for cues, micro expressions, things like that, that are tells that people have slipped into an alpha state, and then he uses specific techniques, specifically storytelling, that allows people to project themselves into the stories that he's telling, come to the conclusions that the heroes of his stories are coming to, and then take those away as lessons in order to be able to manifest change in their own lives. So it's a good strategy. It's part of the reason that I believe that motion pictures have been part of this kind of global MK Ultra mind control operation. I was watching Gaslight a couple of weeks ago, which was a movie starring Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer that was made in 1943, I think, 44. And I wonder if, and that's when Milton Erickson was working with the OSS, and there was a Lookout Mountain Air Force Base that was built in Laurel Canyon in Hollywood. And when I was watching that movie, I was watching this one scene at the beginning of the movie where Charles Boyer is talking to Ingrid Bergman. And he's doing this Milton Erickson style induction on her. But what was really interesting is that imagining that there's an audience full of people sitting in a theater watching this thing, he's also doing an induction on the audience. And it made me start wondering whether or not that was a collaboration, whether or not Gaslight was a collaboration between the OSS and the motion picture industry to see if they could create a film that would not only tell people about how this guy is hypnotizing this woman, but at the same time hypnotize the audience, because that seems to be the way that that Gaslight works. And so that's what we're up against, is that we got to dehypnotize people. And I don't know how you do that. The thing about Transformation of America, at least the section that I'm in right now, is that the way that he helped facilitate this was to take all media away from her. So he took television and motion pictures and music and books away from her and just kept her busy writing about things that had happened to her and other activities that didn't involve media for, I don't know, 6 months or something. It seemed like a long time.
Well, it's insidious, right? I mean, you were telling me this morning about what's the new Netflix doc about social media?
Yeah, I haven't watched it, but somebody was telling me that I need to watch it because they think that I'm addicted to social media, and it's like I don't understand the algorithms, and there's probably no human being on the planet who understands the algorithms as much as I do. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm a Google engineer or anything, but I understood how this stuff was working in the 90s. And so I have a pretty good idea of it. And they were telling me about this movie, and then some other friend of mine told me, I said, you don't have to see the movie because the whole first half of the movie is a yes ladder where you're going, yeah. And then the second half of the movie is, this is why we need legislation. So it's basically a political advertisement, propaganda piece that's designed in order to program all of these people into wanting to legislate free speech. A good reason for me to miss it, Yeah.
They're crafty. And it cracks me up because I read a book maybe 2 weeks ago that was called Irresistible. And it's about technology addiction. So different, be it social media or video games or anything like that. And in the book, it was written by a guy named Adam Alter. He talked about how Netflix was genius because they capitalized on this idea that our brains can't stand it when we don't have closure to a story. This is the cliffhanger, right? So when you're watching episodic television across weeks, they always want to leave you with the cliffhanger at the end of the episode so that you'll be back next week to see it. But with Netflix, when it first started and they put up shows on there, you had to actually physically click, like, please play the next episode. And then they did away with that, where it gives you about 5-second pause and the next one starts. So his advice in the book to break that is either stop an episode at like the 45-minute mark before you get to the end of it, of what's going to happen, the cliffhanger portion, or just watch the first 5 minutes of the next episode and then then do a hard stop so you don't get sucked in and keep the cycle going. But I just think it's hilarious to think, oh, Netflix is worried about people being addicted to social media, but not just media in general, which seems to be the larger problem.
Right. You know, one of the things that breakthroughs that I had with media, especially like video games, is that I got this blood pressure cuff that's not, it's just like a little thing that fits over my arm. It's not like a big separate machine or anything. And I just became obsessive about taking my blood pressure all the time. And
that's probably not good for your blood pressure.
I got to tell you, there are certain motion pictures that were making my blood pressure go so crazy that when it got to a certain level, I would just stop watching the movie. So I would break movies up. I would break them up into 2 or 3 sittings, you know, because I'd have to go for a walk and calm down and, you know, recenter myself and take a look at the stars and breathe deeply and, you know, do all of the things that you do to kind of center yourself. Then I come back and I watch it. You know, not unlike the advice that Tom O'Neill is giving, or Patrick, what's his name? Patrick Phillips. Mark Phillips. I'm doing the thing that George Webb does. You start talking extemporaneously, and then these names just pop into your head, and you spit them out as if they're the right name. They're not. Mark Phillips writes, you know, that you need to kind of like disassociate from anything that's not objective in order to be able to kind of recenter yourself. And so that's what I found myself doing with my blood pressure cuff. And my blood pressure is totally under control now because I know what the things are that are bothering me, and I just turn them off. I go for a walk, and I come back, and I will finish consuming them. But I, you know, I have no reason to want to go see that Netflix thing now. I think I understand it.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's anything new or insightful. Like, yes, people are seriously addicted to social media. I don't need an hour and a half long documentary to tell me that. And yes, it's changing people's moods, and through the algorithms, it's controlling what information people see and believe. Yep.
Indeed. So what else, Tracy?
Well, I don't know. Do we resolve this? You think that we can unhypnotize everybody and then live peacefully side by side in the 50 United States?
I think that if we can figure out a good strategy for unhypnotizing people one-on-one, one at a time, and we can pass that skill set on to people one at a time, that it will become a thing. That will. I mean, here's the thing. People ask me, "What do you believe in?" You know, it's like my daughter's still saying, "Oh, well, you're a Republican." It's like, I'm not a Republican. I believe in all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if that means that I think that people like Klaus Schwab are evil human beings that need to be destroyed, then that's where it is. But the way that you get there is by understanding that those are the things that we believe in, as opposed to I'm on the blue side, or I'm on the red side, or I'm on the liberal side. I mean, I can't stand it when people who believe the same things that I believe right now are using the term libtard. Okay, because it's a way to dehumanize the other people. These people actually, but you know, I pray for Rob Reiner. Okay, I feel sorry for the guy. Okay, he actually believes the stuff that he's saying. He's completely hypnotized, you know. And his father made really funny stuff. He used to make really funny stuff. I used to think he was a funny guy. He made some great movies, you know. He understands human psyche. He does not know what's going on right now. I don't think so. And I want to believe that Donald Trump understands what's going on, but there's only part of me that believes that. Mm-hmm. You know, I still want to see indictments. If we actually have a functioning constitutional government, people should get indicted for the things that they've done wrong. You know, I think that most of the people who are in prison right now for nonviolent crimes shouldn't be there. It's 21st century. There's other ways to punish people without locking them in a concrete cell. You know, there's all kinds of different things that we could do than what we're doing right now, and we're not doing them. which means that what we've got going is dysfunctional. It's not working. And so either make the thing that we've got work or get something else. But you're only going to achieve that you're only going to make the world a better place. It sounds cliche, but with love. Like I have to feel sorry for Rob Reiner. And I'm guilty. I've probably made fun of him on Twitter a lot.
Sure.
Which is part of the reason that my tweets auto delete after 2 weeks, because I say a lot of things on Twitter that I probably shouldn't say. But we got to start figuring out a way to actually legitimately connect with one another, because if we don't, then it's just going to get really ugly. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen. So,
yeah, I have that same fear. I find it to be almost impenetrable with certain people. So I don't know how you wake up a Rob Reiner type, or if he's the last to go, or just that whole contingent of kind of like the Hollywood media complex. We just say, these guys, we have to abandon them. They're never going to recognize reality, or share in the reality that we are all see. The two movies, one screen. Like, they will not turn to our movie and watch it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the two movies, one screen scenario, because that's also a technique, a hypnosis deprogramming technique, is to get people to describe their traumatic experiences as a motion picture, as they would see in a movie theater, in order to separate themselves from it. So that seems to be kind of a common mind control framework for looking at things.
So you have to disassociate from it in order to process it correctly. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you have to look, because the issue, and it's the reason that you never ask somebody who's been in a traumatic event how they feel about something, because it's actually the emotional component that's attached to the event, which gets nominalized. It gets turned into an object. It's dealt with in the psyche as a noun. That thing becomes like, and that's what's going on with Rob Reiner, right? Like, he can't imagine that Donald Trump didn't say that U.S. Marines buried at Belleau Wood were losers. He can't imagine that didn't happen. Ben Rhodes, I'm not so sure about, because he seems to be much more complicated.
He's a little bit more conniving.
Calculating. But the thing is I'll tell you, though, I did, just a sidebar, I did go and I looked at Belleau Wood, and there is a German cemetery that's 300 yards from the American cemetery in Belleau Wood. And I can imagine Trump driving in his motorcade and somebody asking him if he wanted to stop at the German cemetery and making a glib comment about the Germans, the same way that it was reported that he said about the Americans. I can imagine that happening. But, the context is that there is a German cemetery, within, a couple of football throws of the American cemetery. So there is that. And again, I've gone off on a sidebar and I'm rambling.
No, but fine, Peter. It's the digression sessions. That's what we're calling it. I think it's totally fine. It's kind of, we start with one idea and then see what else comes up. And we've covered a lot of ground.
All right. And it's been an hour, which is probably a good length for this thing. And does anybody else have any questions? There's 17 people who seem to have stuck with us through this whole thing. Okay. Well, I'll talk to you later, Tracy.
All right. Well, I was going to give people a minute to ask questions if they want to. You can't expect them to type.
Okay, then I'll just put my hands on my head.
Sit back for a second. Oh, see? You're missing the potential accolades there.
I'm new to this. I'm not Ali. I haven't done 1,000 of these things.
No, I know. No, we got to get theme music, or at least a song going in the beginning.
Yeah, we should do that. This is what Ali does. He always puts a song on for, I think, 2 minutes.
Yeah, to make sure people have time to get in there. It's not like
We also, I didn't tweet this or anything when we started either. I just hit play. We should probably have a checklist.
well, I tweeted it.
Oh, you
But
did?
I will create a checklist for you. Yeah.
Somebody said that they read that Hitler's Olympics was the first televised event. Yeah, I read someplace in the last couple of weeks that television was actually ready before World War II, and that there was some psychological warfare reason why they wanted to wait until after the war to premiere it. And I'm not sure where I read that.
But what was the reasoning behind it?
I don't remember.
It's probably easier to lie about the war if you're just presenting it in newsreels that are shown before movies.
Yeah, probably. Probably because mind control. They hadn't figured out that there was a lot of things that they hadn't figured out with live television yet. That's why I think that Orson Welles' War of the Worlds thing with radio, that was obviously some kind of intelligence operation experiment to see what they could get people to believe. Which, by the way, just sidebar, if none of these things happen, 3 days ago, there was some blonde who said that Trump grabbed her ass or something.
I think he shoved his tongue down her throat in an elevator at the U.S. Open.
Okay.
Yeah,
that story's gone already, right?
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you did have RBG pass away the next day, so.
Right. The memes were thick yesterday.
Yeah.
I really offended somebody on my Instagram story yesterday.
Oh, with an RGB?
With an RGB meme, yeah.
How dare you?
I don't worship humans.
No. It's a bad look.
It's a bad look.
No, at least I learned that lesson pretty early. Like, it's nice to have heroes, but you have to accept the fact that they're human too. Right. And that you put them on a pedestal, they're only going to disappoint you.
Right. How dare you? By the way, that's my ringtone on my. It's not a ringtone. It's my alarm tone. I actually took Greta Thunberg's "How dare you." Yeah. Let me see if I can play it. And I turned it into an alarm tone. But now that my phone updated to iOS 14, I'm not sure that it always pulls up the way that I want it to. Well, let me see.
Well, while you're looking for that, I want to say, I think that if everybody's not already aware, the entire deal with Greta and why she was thrust onto the world stage was in the pursuit of making a documentary, which is now out. So I found that out maybe 6 or 7 months ago. They're like, oh, all of this is going to be presented. Her story from when she started a little strike outside of her school, Fridays, no school, save the environment, whatever, and then traveled across the world, spoke at the UN. It's all been captured for a documentary, which tells me that there were producers on the phone getting her booked, for lack of a better word, to speak at the UN and to go here and there. It's all a contrivance to make a movie.
I wouldn't be surprised if the money for the movie came from the UN. So here is my alarm tone on my phone. Here we go.
How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? How dare you?
So,
that's what wakes you up in the morning?
Yeah, Greta wakes me up. It wakes me up too. It wakes me up with this. It wakes me up with this giant smile on my face too. It's like it's very funny.
It would scare the shit out of me. I don't think she's demonic, that girl.
It does make my dogs bark though. Okay, it's pretty funny. It's the only regret that I have for that alarm tone is that it makes if I'm someplace where there's dogs, the dogs will always start barking when that thing goes off.
Dogs have a sixth sense. They know when there's a demonic presence in the room, and you're bringing it right to them, Peter.
Yeah, so that Greta thing is like, that the whole thing is a production. It's so produced, and it's like, how can you look at that stuff and think any of that stuff is organic, and how can you buy any of that stuff? It's like, the only thing more produced is K-pop.
Yeah. Well, I feel really bad for her. I think it premiered at Cannes, but they had that all virtual this year. So she didn't get.
I feel bad for her for being in it. I mean, I look at her as like a mind control zombie, and she's a victim, of this whole thing. And she may never know she's a victim because she's always going to be surrounded the rest of her life by people who are going to tell her what a hero she is. But, I think it's child abuse, so.
I agree.
Anyway, all right. We haven't gotten any more questions.
Nope.
But KQ, proud American woman, has made lots of comments. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pat. Thank you. The other Pat. Thank you,
Who else?
everybody else who's been watching it. And we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, Yellow Red Sparks a while ago. I agree with you. Tragedy and Hope 101 is a game changer. Definitely check out that book.
Yeah. Josh, I gave Josh my woke university syllabus, and he's just been reading those books and catching up. And there's Barnes.
Hey, Barnes.
Barnes, you got any questions? We're going to leave, but
Yeah.
I was talking to Barnes yesterday. George is going to fly out here, and Barnes has agreed to try to put some rails on George, and I'm going to aim a camera at him, and Barnes is going to start asking him questions like a lawyer, because I noticed when George went on to John O'Loughlin's show, when he first started going on John O'Loughlin's Macduff channel, John's an attorney, and John has been, he was on the bar in DC and Virginia for 40 years. And when George would go off on these rambling road trips of the mouth, John would say, "Hey, man, you were talking about this. What about that?" And so I figured if we could take advantage of Barnes' ability to force people to stay on topic, that it will be a great experience. So I'm looking forward to that. George is supposed to come. He's doing. Yeah,
he's coming
because
out.
I've been trying to edit all the stuff that I've captured on him in the last couple of months, and it's kind of like nailing Jello to the wall, which isn't fun to edit.
No.
Anyway, all right.
Yes, Barnes. Everyone does need an editor.
Everyone needs an editor, and it's nice if you have a director too. Anyway, all right. I'll see you later, Tracy.
Bye, Peter.
Bye, Barnes.